This is the second episode of a mini-series that I created, Future Teammate Comparison, where we analyze and predict what's going to happen in 2021 between two new teammates. In this episode, we're going to look at Lando Norris and Daniel Ricciardo. There's a link in the description and the card above with the other episodes in this series. We're going to analyze three things: performance, the relationship between the two drivers, and the team favorite, meaning who's going to be the number one driver and who's going to be the number two driver. Let's start with performance. This is more or less the same case that we saw between Stroll and Vettel. There's going to be a young driver with a lot of potential and an experienced driver with wins and podiums. And in my opinion, this is the perfect combination for any team. To combine the best of both worlds, to have a team leader that knows what it takes to win, and a talented young driver with a lot of potential and many years ahead of him to learn, adapt, and maybe even win championships. If we look at the points and podiums that the two drivers scored in 2020, we see that they are relatively close. Ricciardo with 119 points and 2 podiums, and Lando Norris with 97 points and 1 podium. Points usually don't mean much, but in this case they actually might. The two cars, the Renault and the McLaren, were relatively close in terms of performance, both having the same engines, the Renault engine, and finishing the championship with 202 points for McLaren and 181 points for Renault. So I think that we can all agree that the cars are relatively close in terms of performance, maybe McLaren taking the advantage a bit. So when we look again at the two drivers and we see that Lando had fewer points and was in the slightly better car, I think it's safe to say that Ricciardo had a better 2020 season than Lando. But the real question, and the question we want to answer in this video, is who's going to be the better driver in 2021? Well, I think Ricciardo is a fast learner and will be up to speed with the new team in no time. But Lando needs to adapt as well, because the cars will switch from Renault power to Mercedes power, and with that a lot of other things will change too. So both drivers have to adapt more or less. Ricciardo having to adapt to the car and to the team and a new group of people. So I think Ricciardo will be really close to Lando in the first races. Maybe a place in front or behind Lando, but overall, close. We know just how good Daniel is, and we know that Lando pushed Carlos a lot, especially in qualifying, where he actually beat Carlos over the 2 years that they were teammates. As far as the second part of the season, I think Ricciardo will have the edge. After getting to know the car, after testing the limits, I think he will absolutely adore the new Mercedes power, and I think he will beat Lando in the championship in 2021. The relationship and friendship. As I've said in my other videos, the relationship between the two drivers is very important, because neither the team or the drivers will thrive in a tense, toxic relationship like the one between Nico and Lewis. And even though this might shock you, I think that the relationship between the two will be different than the one between Carlos and Lando. Let me elaborate. I think that they are going to be good friends at first, both being super funny, chilled out guys, two jokers outside the track. But the real problems will start to become obvious on track after a few races. We know that Ricciardo doesn't like to be a number 2 driver and left Red Bull when he saw that that team started to become Max's team. He loves being a number 1 driver and he deserves it, and he proved that a number of times. In the last 2 seasons with Hülkenberg and Ocon, he had it relatively easy. He beat those two and was considered a team leader. Now he will come up against a new, young driver that clearly has a lot of talent, and I think is going to be the strongest teammate that Daniel had since Max. I am sure that he's going to love the challenge, I'm sure he's going to love being pushed to the extreme, but if and when Lando beats Ricciardo in qualifying or in the race, I'm sure that Daniel won't like it. If Lando will get the preferential treatment, if Lando will get a better strategy, Daniel Ricciardo certainly won't like that. And isn't going to take it as well as Carlos was. When Carlos was out-qualified by Lando, everything was okay between the two. But if Ricciardo gets beaten up by Lando a lot, which who knows might actually happen, because we saw just how good Lando is in qualifying, I think the relationship will suffer a bit. Not to the level of Hamilton and Rosberg, of course, but as I've said, I think it's going to be a bit different than the Carl-Lando relationship that we saw for the last 2 years. The positive in terms of relationship between the two is the learning side of things. Daniel already said that being teammates with Ocon allowed him to see how the younger generation is wired. and I think that Ricciardo has something to learn by how Lando does things. Of course, this works in reverse as well. Lando will have a lot more to learn from Daniel than he did from Carlos. Daniel has a lot of experience, being a 4-time world champion at Red Bull, winning in Monaco, and many other incredible achievements. Lando can learn a lot of tips and tricks, a lot of small details, again, directly or indirectly. He will definitely be able to see what's happening on the other side of the garage, and he will see just how far Daniel can push that car to the limit and try to duplicate results. Daniel had this to say about Ocon, and it applies to Lando as well. I've had good success up until now, but I've enjoyed the challenge. I think that with the young drivers you see, they're pretty quick learners. If I go out and do a fast corner, full throttle, then in the next session or in the next lap even, they're going to do it too. So I like that. I like being kept on my toes, and it's forcing me to grow and get better. Now let's see the team favorite. I've already talked a bit about number 1 and number 2 driver, but let's get more in depth. A midfield team shouldn't really have a number 1 and number 2 driver because their main goal is to score as many points as possible, and it doesn't really matter what driver does that. It's not like they're fighting for the championship and they do a Valtteri is James type of thing. But based on the experience that Daniel has, the winning mentality and the clear talent, I think we can say that he won't be named the number 1 driver, but he will definitely be a team leader. It's not to say that Lando isn't a good driver, of course he's definitely a star of the future, but I think that he's still really young and still has a lot to learn and can learn a lot from Daniel. I think that Lando can accept the fact that Ricciardo, being a more mature and more experienced driver, will be regarded as a team leader. And if Ricciardo is faster than Lando in a race, I think Lando will obey team orders and will understand the situation. So the conclusion? I think that Ricciardo will finish ahead of Lando in the championship, but that Lando is going to be the closest teammate that Daniel had since Max Verstappen. I think that the relationship between the two will be really fun and interesting, but if Lando consistently beats Ricciardo, or if Lando gets the preferential treatment or the better strategy, I think that Daniel will be a bit upset and the relationship between the two will be a bit colder than the one between Lando and Carlos. So yeah, that was it. Stay safe and happy race watching.